Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Peace and love is the Travelers Podcast. And Brother Ali, thank you so much for coming back week after week. It means so much to me. This has been such a really amazing journey, and just having people that really listen and people that really offer themselves and their attention and their intention and their heart and care and concern for the people that we're talking to, the concepts and the ideas that we invite into the space here. But really, what this is about is the fact that all of us is on this really incredibly difficult and challenging life journey. We have the human condition, and then it's the condition of the world that we're living in. It's really difficult. It's especially difficult and challenging, and it requires a lot to try to do it as a person of integrity, a person who believes in virtue over material, that like meaning is more important than form. This is a world that really rewards the material stuff. And, the material stuff is necessary, but there are certain people are just really inclined and built to want to be people of integrity, to believe in what it all means, and to want to be driven by that first and foremost. So the people that we have on this show, these are people that I personally am checking in with because I benefit a lot from their navigating of it. And we can compare notes and, compare the roadmap and compare travel journals, as it were. These are people that have tried and succeeded to do things that no one is asking them for, and no one is celebrating, and no one is giving permission. A lot of times, once they break through, or once they are so generous with what they're giving and offering, that it starts to catch on and people start to recognize it, and it starts to reach people that they don't even know. Then sometimes they'll be celebrated. And that's what we mean when we say celebrity, like a person who's celebrated. But for someone to put their life into that sort of navigating is really, really valuable to everyone else who strives to be a person like that as well. We need exemplars. We need co-travelers. We need people that we can check in with. So that's what this podcast is really about. The guest this week is Speech from Arrested Development. And, Speech and Arrested Development, their story is one of the ones that really proves what so many of us feel, which is that, okay, I'm not the only one that wants to hear music that helps me be a better me. I'm not the only one that wants to hear music that's encouraging us to build a better world. I'm not the only one that wants to hear music that affirms life. I'm not the only one that believes that this is actually what music is here for. And, when people come along like that, it's very difficult. It's just really challenging. You're fighting against all of the powers that be. And also, there's a feeling though that, like, when I do what I do, the people that it resonates with and lands in, and the people that recognize what I'm doing, it really, really matters to them. And there's a feeling that, like, if more people were aware of what we do, they would love it too, and it would matter to them. And, this could be a viable thing in the world, but we're just told constantly nobody wants to hear that. People don't like positive music. That's a niche thing. It's hard to find a market for that. And you hear that so much that you start to think maybe they're right, with very few exceptions. Then there are people that break through, and they do it on their terms, and they do it with positive, life-giving, beautiful music. And when those moments happen, it's like, it's just glorious, you know what I'm saying? And so Arrested Development came onto the main stage in 1992 when I was maybe 13 years old, 14 years old. And the fact that they came out and had so much um, impact on culture. They had tremendous, like, big hit records. They sold 4 million records. They had huge radio crossover pop radio records, like songs that were embraced, these big singles, Tennessee, Mr. Wendell, Revolution, People Every Day. These are enormous records, enormous songs. And then something happened in between their first album and their second album. And that's one of the big things that I wanted to ask Speech about is like what happened that it really feels like the music industry decided that there wasn't a place for Arrested Development at the table anymore on the main stage and on a big major scale. And this is after they delivered enormous global hit records. So what that does for somebody like me and the people that I tend to do life with is it gives us this affirmation that like, no, it's not that we're not commercially viable. It's not that nobody wants to hear us. That on some level and in some sector, there are people making decisions and pulling strings. There are that element or that possibility of there being gatekeepers who don't want certain messages to be in the mainstream. That there is some reality to that. So Speech is one of those people that I was really, really excited to talk to. And we've been on a recently. We're just Chuck D produced executive produced a song called "The Line of Fire," and he included Speech on that record. And so he and I got to be on an album together. We've spoken to each other just back and forth a little bit on social media, but you'll hear in this conversation this is our first time really actually sitting down and talking. I just want to give a special shout out. Anyone that makes it to the end of these podcasts always hears the special thanks to Darian Washington. Darian is a dear friend of ours from Minneapolis who moved to Brooklyn not too long ago. And I just happened to be in Brooklyn this week with my family. I'm actually staying in the Bronx, but I happened to be in New York with my family this week, and Speech just got off tour. And so they said, like, if you want to do this interview, this conversation, we could do it now. So we jumped at the opportunity. And I'm like, okay, where is there a podcast studio in New York that I could go record? And my dear beloved brother Darian, just recently, within the last year, moved uh, to Brooklyn, and so we got to come in here to Bushwick, Brooklyn specifically. So I got to come and visit this beautiful neighborhood today. And he's out of town. He's actually in Minneapolis, and then I'm heading to Minneapolis, and he'll be back in New York. So we're not going to be able to see each other. But he just opened his home to me, so maybe you'll hear in the background some trucks and just kind of the sounds of Brooklyn being Brooklyn outside. But as always, special thanks and much love to Darian Washington. We're brought to you, as always, by the Zakat Foundation. We're also joined on this episode by Mystic Man, men's grooming and beard care products that really comes from such a place of love, and also by my good friends at Udamentary. And you'll hear more about those during the episode. But thank you, and please enjoy this episode, this conversation with my man Speech. You're somebody that I've wanted to talk to for a very long time, and I'm not overstating or exaggerating even a little bit to say that I wouldn't be who I am if it wasn't for you and for your example and for what you contributed to the culture, especially at the time that you first broke in. It's just been monumental, life changing. There are so many of the good things that I think I've been able to really glean from the culture and from the art, that I know that you're the one that ushered those things in and started me on the journey. So it's a tremendous honor and blessing to be talking to you.
Well, first of all, man, thank you so much for that. That means a lot to me. I believe that, you know, what we do as hip hop artists and as artists can really change the paradigm for people's thinking and people's actions. And to know that that had some type of effect on you from the 90s and the stuff that I put out means a lot to me, bro, because your music as well has sort of echoed back to me and inspired me. You know, when I heard your perspectives, to me, your perspectives are so resilient, so positive, um, in the best meaning of that word, and so determined. Like that's what I get from when I hear your lyrics and your music. It's so determined, it's so positive, it is so meaningful and resilient that it inspires those types of traits from anyone who listens to it. So I've always appreciated what you bring to the culture. And so I was always looking forward to meeting you and talking to you as well, man. So thank you. It means a lot.
It's a really beautiful thing that the way we finally connected was through Chuck D, because I know he's such a like mentor to the world, but
Yeah,
to us in particular,
yeah,
and the fact that we ended up on a track that, I got sent like, could you rap on this? And by the time it came back, they had changed the drums so much about it changed, but Doug Wimbish and Speech are on the track. It was crazy. Like, man, it means a
yeah.
lot, you know.
Well, it's funny because I got on that track particularly because you and Chuck were on it, and Doug, I love. I Live in Color. I have deep respect and love for it, like deep. But specifically from a hip hop perspective, it was because you and Chuck was on it. And I didn't do a lot on that record. I'll be the first to say I did a few little hums and whoos. But um, to be honest, when I told Crom, I was like, "That's I want to be on it because these brothers are on it." And so, so it was all good. When he asked me if I could be on it, I said, "Yeah, I'll do it." You know what I'm saying?
So you grew up in between Milwaukee and Tennessee. My understanding is that you spent the school year during the school year in Milwaukee, and then in the summertime, you were in Tennessee with your grandparents, living in like very very rural setting with outhouses and like the whole thing, being in the with the land and with the folks.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's such a like one of the things that I've appreciated so much about what you've consistently brought to the table from the very beginning is just the holistic presentation of seeing the whole family on stage. That you always had women on stage, you always had elders on stage. Your music, so much of hip hop music pulls from such eclectic sources, but your early music in particular really did that. How much do you think that the way you grew up impacted just the holistic approach that you had to the music?
100%. I mean, the reason I did bring that community and that communal energy with Arrested Development is because I witnessed it growing up in Tennessee, in the rural areas of Tennessee. There's a small town called Glimp, which I was raised in with my grandmother, and seeing her raise her own crops. We ate food right from the backyard, right? Seeing how we worked together as a community in order to supply food for each other, in order to encourage one another. My grandmother was big on collard greens and um, things like and peas, and others in the neighborhood was big on yams and on potatoes, and others had watermelon and fruits. So we would all have more than enough food for each other, but everybody was broke monetarily. But because of trade and because of community, nobody was without. Nobody. So that made a huge impact on self determination for me. It made a provable and seeable example of how people of no financial means can still be 100% rich, and through community, through helping one another out. So that to me always made a lasting impact, and I believe that that is the key for any people that are oppressed to be able to rise above that oppression and have self-determination and move forward. So I think that a lot of the keys to freedom are already in our possession. They're not something that we have to go out and get from any particular government agency or some political agenda necessarily. That it's things that we have right in our backyards.
Yeah, literally that the earth and the community literally provides everything that someone would need to actually live a real healthy and loving and completely full dignified life. So yeah, so having a limited access to the money that the white man writes letters on that's supposed to, you know what I mean? That's supposed to be everything.
Right.
So I just wonder how much did that really prepare you for the moment where you enter into the music industry? I'm jumping ahead and there's other things I want to ask about, but how did that prepare you for jumping into the music industry? And I just imagine that what you brought to the table was so new and so different. What was the reception like for you all coming in?
Um, well, there were stages to that, brother. So initially, before we got signed, the reaction was a lot of rejection. You're getting a lot of rejection
Mm.
letters from a lot of labels. We were striving to get out there, and by any means necessary. Atlanta was not known for hip hop um, on a national and worldwide level. And so East Coast, West Coast was by all means the main primary places where hip hop was coming from, and where the narratives were being brought by. So there was a lot of uphill battles for us as a crew, and at the same time, once we got out there, there was a lot of love and there was a lot of fantastic reception from people around the world too, which was pretty unique for hip hop at the time, where we were getting a lot of love from Europe, we were getting a lot of love from Africa, a lot of love from third world, quote unquote, third world countries who were really supportive of what Arrested Development was about. They saw the imagery and it related to them. It was like, wow, I get this. This is where I'm from. This is where my people, this is how we live. So it made hip hop accessible for a huge swath of the planet that prior to Arrested Development, they didn't understand it as much. If they weren't from New York or LA or scenes like that, they didn't understand it, but they understood where we were coming from. So the reception initially was really tough from a label standpoint, but once we got accepted, it was really um, amazing. Just the love that we got, and you can see that from the, we sold 4 million albums that first album.
Mhm.
Probably way more than that, too, but 4 million as far as what they, what RIAA stood, could say. So yeah, it's a pretty amazing reception.
When people are rooted in that way, when you have such a deep rooting that's embodied, that's an embodied reality, it really gives them and like fortifies them for that opportunity to be able to stand in front of these people who are literally gatekeepers, have their hand on the checkbook that could either open the door or close it, and to be able to demand what is right. And so I feel like in thanking you, we also need to thank your grandmother and all the aunties and uncles and everybody, that really made that such a reality, man, because you standing firm for what you did, really opened the floodgates, I think, for so much amazing music and expression that came at that time and after it.
I appreciate you saying that. To me, I've always believed that when anyone stands in their real truth, not not the made up truth that they feel will make them successful, but their real truth, what they inevitably do is they give permission for other people who are watching to do the same. So many of us who especially are artists and wanting to get into the industry, we're almost looking for what pathways work. So we may have our own pathway in mind, but if that hasn't been proven to work yet, we don't want to waste our time trying it a lot of times. So we're waiting to see if someone else has ever done this, that, and the third in order for us to try to do it. But when we see someone stand in their truth, it also gives us permission to do the same. Like, to give you an example, for me, when 3 Feet High and Rising came out with De La Soul, it gave me permission to go further musically because they already did it. So when they were sampling the Turtles and when they were sampling Hall and Oates and when they were sampling everything from Mandrill to Funkadelic and everything in between, that gave me permission. Like I loved all of that stuff too, but it gave me permission.
Right.
Not that I talked to them personally. I think you get my point.
Yes,
But
sir.
it gave me mental and spiritual and emotional permission to go further. And same difference with Public Enemy from a message standpoint and musical standpoint, because Public Enemy, I was raised in a conscious household. But my raps when I was much younger was not about that consciousness. It was about cars and bling. And that was because Run DMC and others had given me permission to go in those particular areas. But when Public Enemy came out, it gave Chuck D, without him knowing me personally, gave me permission to speak about, oh, well, Farrakhan or War. I can talk about the Panthers or, there's other things that I could talk about. And I believe Arrested Development and Brother Ali and so many others do that same thing for so many artists out there around the world.
At the time that you all came out, and as I was going to ask you actually specifically about De La, because of the fact that, you had a few different lanes of hip hop that existed at that time. There was music that was just pure cultural, artistic excellence. So we're talking about like people that are just on the mic destroying it. And then you had music that was about fun and
Yep.
partying, and you had music that was, very specifically like street tales. And then there was the lane of music that was overtly and expressively positive music. And even in that lane, though, there was a certain way that you had to present it. Like I think about Chuck D and I think about, Brother J and X Clan. There was this thing that was like, okay, this music's very positive, but also this is there still was a level of like masculine bravado, borderlining on machismo with that type of music that like I'm positive, but also you can get these hands at any time, and I'm still, the man. And then when De La Soul particularly came in, there was like a little bit of relaxing of that I feel like really was the bridge to when by the time you came, it was like full on. There was like a new image of black masculinity, even in the positive conscious space, that it absolutely existed in those circles. If you really were in those communities, like the consciousness community of people reading Malcolm and John Henrik Clark and
Yeah,
Scheherazade Ali and like all of
yeah.
those names in the 90s, that there was a type of man that was very clearly had a type of sensitivity might be an overused word, but a certain type of like sweetness and caring. There was like a certain man that also had a maternal
Yeah.
instinct, and that also clearly had been loved and trained by women, and we're able to. You are the first person that I saw do that on the public stage, and also for you to have done that and broken through so far into making hit records that the world literally was introduced to a new type of black man.
I appreciate that. For me personally, I look at the idea of what manhood is and what masculinity is, and I challenge it often because to me, I look at men like in the Bible, in the Old Testament, there's the prophet David, right? And David was a warrior. And at the same time, he was a harp player and he was a musician at
That's
his
right, that's
core.
right.
And he loved gardening and he loved dancing.
Yes, sir.
But he could kill a person too. Like he was a man that had much blood on his hands if you read scripture, right? And so he was a man that had these different compartments to him, which I believe all men are. I believe the roughest and toughest of men. You know, have all of these compartments, but speaking of permission, we talked about just a second ago, I think so many men have not had the permission, in a sense, to show that side of who they are. So with our music, on People Every Day, one of our biggest hits, I'm writing that line in that song, right? So narratively, I'm writing this line of don't mess with me. You're messing with my girl. Now we're in a fight. The police have to pull me off of you. But the moral of the story is you never know who you step into. You could get stabbed, shot, killed, or hurt. It's not
That's right.
worth it. You know what I'm saying? So like it's writing this line of this. I'm here to protect my lady, but at the same time, we don't need to be doing this. So it's writing these lines of what masculinity is, and I think that's right to do, and I think more of us need to do that.
I think it's so telling also that you reference Ice Cube in the song. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like I'm not Ice Cube, but I had to stomp this guy
I'm
for
not
being
asking.
rude, and
Exactly.
your language even changed is in that moment. You
Yep.
know what I mean?
Yep.
And it's like, listen, man, yeah, that's one of the things that we talk a lot about on this show, and for Muslims, and we'll talk. I'll get to in a second how you had a lot to do with also my conversion to Islam by being part of that Malcolm X moment,
Yeah.
but we talk so often about prophetic masculinity because we believe that all of the prophets were that way.
Yeah.
And, the Prophet Muhammad is the most documented human life
Right.
in the history of the world.
Yeah.
And so we know about him sewing and cleaning,
Yeah.
and we know about his nurturing, how nurturing he was. And also the fact that he also had a sword. It's in Istanbul. You can go see it. You
Exactly.
know what I mean? And that sword got heads on it.
Exactly.
And, that all of that, and again, man, it goes back to this feeling of like holistic, that you brought the holistic reality of the family on stage.
Yeah.
You also brought all of what it is to be a man onto the stage with you as well.
Yeah.
So I wonder though, what was the response from other hip hop artists? Like, how did you feel when you were in a room with X Clan or with Ice Cube or with De La, or what was their reception to you, and how did you feel in terms of your place in hip hop at that moment?
Yeah. It was interesting. every one of those people you mentioned as possible examples of how I felt were different. So, in other words, I was in the room with all the people you mentioned, X Clan, De La, so on and so forth, Q. But with De La, for instance, I went to them for help to try to get us signed. I went to Pastanus to see if he could help us get us signed to Tommy Boy. And they were already having some problems with Tommy Boy that I didn't know about. And he loved Rainy Revolution, one of our tunes from the first album. And he was like, yo, I love what y'all are doing, right? So he was trying to do what he could to get us into these rooms in the first place. So it was all love with him. Um, but initially, when Arrested Development came in, there was a lot of love from the hip hop world. But as we got more and more successful, there became a more competitive, sort of like not wishing us well energy. You know what I'm saying? To where we started winning a lot of awards that some other artists felt like they should have won, or we were starting to become media darlings, which we didn't bring on, but that was just what happened with us. Um, we started to become more and more media darlings at that time, and because of that, there was I want to say a fear of how much we were starting to take traction and how much of the narrative that we were showing was starting to become questionably the narrative of where hip hop should go. And that's when I think we became a danger in a sense, because I think a lot of artists was like, well, no, I mean that we ain't down with that, not to that extent. You know what I'm saying? Like we don't want the narrative to change to this extent. So we started to become a problem in a sense. Like we were too many places. And so I think initially it was love, and then after some time it was problematic. I have a lot of stories, bro. Like we were in LA, and I'm not going to mention names. There was acts that was huge in LA that when we were performing, they pulled the plug on us, meaning the artists themselves pulled our plug literally from the wall so that it would sabotage our show. Like that was the extent of where some artists had gotten to, where they were trying to stop the movement. You know what I mean? So it was very real. So it was an interesting trajectory with us when it came to how hip hop was responding to
Mm.
us.
What were the DJs like? Were the DJs really, thinking Red Alert and Funk Flex? Those are the early days of Funk Flex, and like, were you all played? Because I was in Minneapolis at that time,
Yeah,
and so we had just the one black radio station on AM. Shout to KMOJ, and one of the great DJs just passed away recently,
yeah,
Disco T, one of the great hip hop curators in the Twin Cities. Um, so we heard Arrested Development in the mix with everything else that was going on at that time. But were the hip hop DJs playing you in the mix on those shows?
yeah. Red Alert in particular was. He was a big supporter, and it's because he already had that frame of mind. I mean, here he is. He brought KRS One to the forefront. He brought Native Tongues and Jungle Brothers and Tribe and all. So he already had that in his veins. He understood that that was a legitimate part of the hip hop narrative, right? But then there was others that were not down with us. Source Magazine at the time gave our first album 3 stars. I think it was a reluctant 3 stars out of five, right? And they are 3 mics out of five. They didn't understand it. Like they didn't understand where we were coming from. There was a lot of heads from the New York area who was sort of anti Arrested Development. They thought that we were trying to bring sort of hippie energy to hip hop and not street energy. Ice T at the time literally dissed us in public. Like he literally said that we were trying to bring slavery back. And like, I mean, I shouldn't say he literally said that. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but he basically said that we're sort of bringing back this docile massa type of thing, and all of which was obviously way off base. But that was his understanding at the time, and that's what he said about us at the time. So there was those energies of like, what are these cats trying to bring to the table? They didn't understand it. Karis One, to give you an example, 10 years after we released that first album, he called me at my house and he's like, yo, I just got what you were saying in Tennessee. And this is the mighty Karis One. We would do tours together. Me and Karis One and Big Daddy Kane did shows together, but it just hit him 10 years after Tennessee was released what Tennessee was about. Prior to that, and he's a deep lyricist, so I know he checks lyrics. But prior to that, I think he didn't really understand what angle are we coming from. You know what I'm saying? Like, what are you trying to say at the end of the day? And he finally got it, and he was very moved by what it was all about. So I just find it interesting that I guess people's heads at the time was so sort of like this is what hip hop is. And when we came in, I think it sort of skewed that for a minute, and it made them sort of have to recollect and try to understand, well, what are they about? You know, what are they trying to say? And especially because we were so influential and popular. If we weren't popular just underground, I think it would have been no big deal. But we were taking a lot of space in any room. We were taking a lot of air, a lot of space. You know what I mean? So we were an elephant that had to be reckoned with at the time.
The Zakat Foundation is an organization, a group that you've heard about over and over again on this podcast. And I'm saying that because I want to get the word out about what they do, but also to encourage you to, when in times of when things are good, it's good to give. In times of uncertainty, it's good to give. When we're feeling depression and anxiety, it's really good to give back, to share. Even if we don't have a lot, we can give a little bit. And the feeling that that gives us when we're in those moments, it might be the last thing we think of, but those are moments that are really life affirming. They're really beautiful moments to be able to share with other people and to do it in a way where we can feel a sense of trust that what I'm sharing is going to reach the people that it's meant for. And it's actually going to contribute to them living more rich and full and complete, dignified lives. And that's one of the things that Zakat Foundation is known for. It's a Muslim led organization. They work all over the world. They don't only help Muslims and they don't proselytize. Some of their programs are really unique and special in the sense that in the orphan support and relief program, for example, it's $50 a month to fully fund an orphan. And 100% of the money goes directly to the people that we're trying to impact. None of it is used for budgets. None of it is used for marketing. None of it is used for overhead. 100% of that money reaches the people that we're trying to help. And that's very rare, you know. Also, Zakat Foundation has supported this podcast from the beginning. And that's really a sign of their holistic approach to to giving back, to being a real global humanitarian organization that all of the human being, the entirety of the human being, is important and it all needs to be addressed and it all needs to be looked at. It all deserves care and concern and thought and attention and intention. And that's what we hope to do here on this podcast. So we're very grateful to Zakat Foundation for supporting. You can follow them on social media at Zakat US, and you can also go to their website. But I'm encouraging you to spread the word about Zakat Foundation. And when times are good and when times are difficult and challenging, really consider as part of the remedy, as part of therapy and a spiritual practice and self care and exercise and all of these things, please consider as part of that giving some charity, giving some money, donating some money to helping other people. The result is really, really beautiful and really helpful. So shout out to Zakat Foundation. My man Justin Mashouf is a b-boy. He's an Iranian American brother. He's a dad. He's a documentary filmmaker. Just all around beautiful brother. And he's produced a line of men's hair care, beard care, grooming products that's based on sacred cedar. Sacred cedar also has tremendous healing properties, and cedar is something that's been used for generations by the wise knowers and indigenous elders and healers for the properties that it has. Specifically, Mystic Man is the name of the company. It's the service that he provides. These aren't big companies that we work with. These are people that I know, homies that I know that offer something dope to the world because it matters to them. Mystic Man is about the reality that, you know, oftentimes men are valued for being big and strong and powerful and having loud voices and being able to move things around in the material world. And that's all well and good. And sometimes we need to do that. But the reality is that the beauty of masculinity really comes from being attached to the world of meaning. And that world of meaning is what gives us balance. That world of meaning is what makes us lovers and servants and gives us the ability to be soft and to be gentle and to be soothing and to be healers and to be healed and to really be in communion with and community with and with a deep, profound connection with ourselves and with the creator and with the world of meaning and the spiritual realm and the people in our lives and the societies that we're in, the communities that we're in. This is what it means to us to be mystic men, to be a mystic man, to be a soul and flesh, to be in the world of meaning and the world of forms, to be in the world of healing and growing, and also in the world of activism and action. To be spiritual people who are also have effect on the material world, and that effect we hope for it to be beautiful and to be light and to be radiant. you know all of this is tied up in, and so, like, what does that have to do with our beards? You know what I'm saying? It means that the way that we care for and the way that we treat our physical selves and the way that we show up in space in the physical world, when it's beautified, when it's healing, when it's holistic, when it's organic, when it's connected to creation itself, this all brings about a sense of what we're talking about, and it makes it a reality. So head to mystic-man.com. You check out the line of products that they have. This stuff, it smells beautiful. It also, brings an energy and a vibe around with you wherever you go, promotes beautiful hair growth, natural hair growth. And also you get a handmade wooden comb with every orders, which is really beautiful, really, really dope. And when you go to mystic-man.com, when you get to the checkout area, put in travelers, and they give you a little something off because of the fact that we're cool like that. It's crazy. In our little hip hop community, I remember really saying, like, yo, this Arrested Development record is it, man. Like, this is dope. And one of the more like street kind of dudes in our little circle of like people that were actually trying to make the music, we got in a physical like altercation. Like, I got in a fight at 14 years old over loving your music. But what's funny is that, so he had some stuff, he got in trouble and things like that. And then he kind of had his like conversion moment where he didn't convert to Islam, but like he came back to me and he was wearing beads and he was like, yo, brother, I just want you to know. And this was his way of like, this was shorthand for saying, I'm getting my life together. I've been awakened. I'm
Right.
woke now. I'm
Yeah.
consciousness. He was like, just want you to know, man, I've been jamming that Arrested Development album real heavy. And so we hugged it out, and you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's interesting though, brother, what you were saying about people thinking that you are docile, because I think that there was, or this is a projection of mine, an observation of mine again as a teenager. I think that the music industry might have thought that you all were like docile, happy
Yeah.
black people too.
Yeah.
And that they really
Yeah.
at some point had an, like, when was the wake up call though, when they realized, I think about on Diggable Planet's first album, they had Cool Like That. And white people
Yeah.
loved Cool Like That because it was so simple and they didn't understand. It was like, oh, this is a
Yeah.
catchy little thing. So then when they
Yeah.
came back, they're like, okay, here's money. We're gonna give you money. And they made the blowout comb, like one of the
Right.
most pro-black, straight
Yep.
black man is God 5% records that you could ever possibly make. And the industry is like, oh, never mind. We're just gonna go back to this black
Right.
people killing each other music.
Yeah.
Thank you for your
Right.
service. We're done with you.
Exactly.
So I wonder,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
what was the wake-up call that you experienced? And for me just observing it like that, what was that like for y'all though? And how did the industry respond once they started to get an idea for what was actually being showcased?
Yeah. I think it was for us revolution during the Malcolm X soundtrack. with Spike Lee's film. When we did Revolution, it was a lot less shrouded in lyrical sort of double meanings and things of this nature. Lyrically, it was a lot more of a straightforward record, which I always felt was part of our repertoire, right? But so to me, it wasn't a new era. It was just another shade of what we do. Because to me, in songs like "Give a Man a Fish," I spoke clearly as well, which was our first album. And by the time our second album, Zingalama Dooney, came out, that was a more straightforward record as well. The concepts weren't as shrouded in sort of lyrical double meanings and imagery. It was just more straightforward messages. Um, I think that the industry started to see, okay, this is just straight pro black. This is straight. You know what I'm saying? And so I think that it started to change their perception of how to market us, if they are going to market us, and whether they wanted to be a part of that movement, which is, ultimately a side of what white supremacy does. It makes a decision as to what things they're going to let through the gate and what things they're going to keep back. I don't know if you ever seen my documentary I did called The Nigga Factory. I feature some of your music in there. So check it out if you get a chance. It's on
Are
YouTube.
you serious?
I'm dead serious. I did a documentary series called The Nigga Factory, in which I talk about the 400-year marketing campaign to demean the images and the spirits of black people through media. And you got to peep it out. It's a powerful piece. It's got well over 1 million views from different platforms. And um, I use one of your tunes on there, so I'm gonna let you watch it and then you'll peep it out. But uh, anyway, in that I talk about the way that they gatekeep the various musics and messages that are going to get out to the masses. Yeah.
We grew up in the consciousness community, like reading and really putting a lot of weight, I did, and the people around me, in the Willie Lynch letter. And then lately, I've started to hear that maybe the Willie Lynch letter might have been historical fiction. But regardless of
Yeah.
whether or not that was actually presented for the purpose we thought it was, the ideas in that document are absolutely true. Like, and they're being borne out, over time. We see how real they are.
Yeah, the Willie Lynch letters probably were not, you know, what we thought they were, but they are so factual. And there's another thing called the screw tape letters that is fictional as well, but have such a it's so based in fact as far as how this battle between good and evil within our own spirits and our own minds is
You
waged.
talking about C.S. Lewis? The screw
Yeah,
tape letters by C.S. Lewis?
yeah.
Yo, I love the screw tape letters, man.
Me
I
too.
love
Me
that
too.
joy, yo. I love
Me
that thing,
too.
man. And it's funny, like when we're talking to people about Sufism, like I include that in my classes about Sufism. Like we talk about
Yeah,
the screw tape letters, man. That's
yeah.
so dope that you bring that up.
That's dope. Yeah, it's like really dope.
Sometimes when we're trying to search for what's going on underneath the surface and what's being hidden from us, these things like the screw tape letters or the Willie Lynch letter or something like that, they really appeal to us because it's like we know that something is happening. Like it says in Diary of the Thin Man, something's happening here, but you don't know what it is, do you, Mr. Jones? Like we know that something is going on. There's also a story about that we hear in this kind of like community about this meeting that happened where the people that had invested in private prisons and the music industry and the entertainment industry and journalistic community, that they all got together and made a decision about the history of hip hop. Whether or not that meeting specifically happened, like it's very obvious that these different interests are in cahoots and things like that. And I don't
Fact.
think it shows up anywhere better than in your music because of the fact that you sold 4 million records and you had these enormous hits on the first album. And then when you come back, it's almost like there's no interest in marketing you any longer. And
Fact.
it can't be for financial reasons. It can't be because this group can't make hits. It can't be. It's not that they don't make singles. It's not that they're
Yeah.
not marketable. It's not that they're not charismatic enough. You got a beautiful woman on the cover this time. Like
Yeah.
it's not that Arsenio's not showing you love. It's not that,
Yep.
like, none of those things. It really feels from an outside perspective like there was a decision made that this group cannot be in the zeitgeist. What was that like on your end? How did that show up? Like what was that, as the one at the center of all of that? please, man, walk us through and share like what really happened during that time.
So even on the song "Give a Man a Fish," I say if they take away our contract, we still got talent and we still got contacts. So I knew from the get go that this is how they do us. I knew that the window of opportunity when you use these big machines that are not run by the community to get your music out there, that they also have the ability to close that window. So I knew that that was there. Public Enemy knew it. They talked about, from their first album, they said, we're going to make it, we're going to be doing this for a certain amount of time, and then they're going to close us off because things are going to get so hot, so heated. And that's exactly what happened. We've sold tons of records, like you just stated. PE sold tons of records, clearly shown the sellability, the profitability, big tours, big um, presence in the media space, so on and so forth. But all of us have been shut down by the industry. So when I started seeing that happen, it didn't surprise me. I knew that this was now the industry deciding to change focus, go a different direction, not because of lack of profitability. A lot of people that are sort of young to this industry thought that it's because it don't sell. Conscious music just don't sell. They don't care about none of this. It's all about the green. Well, that's not true. They do care about it, and it's not just about the green. They do, of course, want to make profit, but we were profitable, so that's not the issue. They also want to make sure that they are putting out there the messages that they personally feel comfortable with. They may or may not agree with them, but they feel comfortable with it. It doesn't it doesn't upset their zeitgeist. So music that talks about murdering each other, that never reaches their doorstep. That's not in their community. So for them, it's entertainment. It's cool. It's like, oh, that's fun. It's whatever. And so
Mhm.
music, however, that talks about black issues and that messes with their conscience. It makes their guilt come up. It makes the narratives in their community start to change. Some of the relationships they have start to be questioned amongst people that they know, like which side of the fence are you on with these issues? And it starts to mess up their entire balance. And that's what makes them feel uncomfortable and they need to squash it. So yeah, it's definitely a real thing, and I felt it coming. I saw it coming. I saw this window of opportunity for us to get into the masses closing, and it was very very hard for me because, you know, I knew that it was only one record that we really had that window of opportunity of mass, exposure. And not to mention, at the exact same time, for reasons that are very common, our band was also having internal problems because it was our first time ever having money. It was our first time being in the music industry professionally. It was our first time having, sort of crews of management and agents and people talking in our ears. Like everybody's around all of these different entities that prior to us being successful, were not even in our circumference. We didn't have agents talking to us about this, that, and the third, managers, all of these various groups that happen when you start to become successful. So all of this stuff is starting to happen to the same group at the same time. It was an overload of information, an overload of data coming our way, and it did overwhelm us internally. And then to see that window closing externally, all of that was happening at the exact same time. It was very trippy, very trippy.
How old were you when that was going on at that moment?
23, 24, somewhere in there. Yeah.
Was there do you remember specific things that were there certain moments where it's like, you're in a meeting and you play the new album for the label and it's the kind of like icy reception, or like were there moments that you could start to realize like, oh, it's already happening. These people are, we're not even going to get a 3 album run. Like these people have already made their decision.
Yeah, there was moments when we were in meetings when we played the album. They acted like they loved it. They acted like they were going to put everything behind it. So then when we started talking about budgets, now just to give you an example, with our first album, our first video was Tennessee. They gave us a $20,000 budget to make it. The record was number one on the R&B and hip hop charts. It was number three on the pop charts. It sold millions of copies, and it exalted our record into millions of sales. Right? We got a $75,000 advance on that first album. By the time our second album came out, Once they heard it, they decided to give us um, a $75,000 music video budget. But by this time, groups like the Fugees were on their way. Group People like P Diddy was doing videos with airplanes and private jets and yachts in the middle of the ocean, and the video budgets were in the hundreds of thousands. This is during the time when um, um, uh, Busta was doing videos with elephants in the room, and you know what I'm saying. This is during this time period, basically where budgets were huge, and they were willing to only give us 75 grand. This is after having sold 4 million albums off of $75,000 advance. You talking about it, profit? Our record was extremely profitable to the label, and they weren't even willing to give us. So I had to we did a video called United Front. I literally, from my own pocket, put $230,000 into trying to make a music video that was comparable to the people that were out at the time. So, yeah, I saw it very clearly that they were not going to support us. They were not going to put money behind this record. They were not going to, do the various mechanism or pull the various mechanisms that they pull in order to make sure that the world knows that these things exist. They weren't willing to do that early on.
You mentioned the Revolution record and the fact that Spike Lee made this epic movie. I mean, that was in my mind anyway. I think that along with the Million Man March were like the turning points and like the markers for that generation in terms of black empowerment, the black freedom movement really landing firmly and squarely and taking on a new tone in our generation, in the hip hop generation. Like there were so many things that came along obviously before and after that, but those were really major moments. And Spike Lee could have gone to Public Enemy. He could have gone to anybody, but that the song Revolution, and then also when the video came out, we didn't have VHS copies of the Malcolm X movie yet. So if we went to the movie theater and saw it, the only time that we could ever see clips again was in that video for that song. So it was almost like we got to see a trailer for the movie. And the song itself was just such an impactful moment and really brought that to life. I mean, you're really immortalized through so many things, but that one in particular is crazy. What was that? What was that like for you? Where did that record go? Where did you perform it? Who did it reach? Like, what was it like to be the person in the middle of that moment?
That was an interesting space. First of all, I didn't know this until many, many years later, probably about 5, 6 years ago. I found out that Chuck D actually had a lot to do, or maybe everything to do with us getting that opportunity with Spike. Spike wanted Chuck D and Public Enemy to do a song for that soundtrack. And apparently, from what I understand, um, they were going through the Public Enemy was going through some internal issues, and they could not do any recordings at that point. So they turned it down. And Chuck, specifically, from what I understand, mentioned Arrested Development to do it instead. So that was number one. Number two, us and Spike were already cool. So I had asked Spike prior to Arrested Development even being big. I had asked Spike to put us in one of his movies, and we weren't big either. I mean, we weren't big, and he found out about who we were, and I asked him, "Yo, we're a group that's coming through. We're trying to make our move. Could you put us in a movie?" And so for me at the time, I thought it was just a manifestation of all the various times we reached out to him. But I learned later that it was really because of Chuck that we got that opportunity. Now, when that record came out for Arrested Development, there was a lot of cats in the hood who was like not understanding where we were coming from with previous records. But when Revolution came out, they felt like it had more of a militant energy that they really respected coming from our group, and it better helped to formulate for them what our deepest intentions were from a movement and activism standpoint. So I think it really concreted us as a group to be reckoned with. The first time we ever performed that song live, I want to say was at the Apollo in Harlem. And if you know the Apollo stage, which you do, it's a tough stage. They will boo you in a heartbeat. They will. It doesn't matter how many records you've sold, how many awards you've won. That doesn't move the Apollo crowd. So only the music itself and what you present moves that crowd. Well, I loved that, but I was nervous because despite our success at the time, I knew that this could be a changing point. We did that song and the crowd went crazy. They loved it. And that to me sealed the deal as far as our legitimacy in the space of hip hop, what we offer, that unique feeling that we bring. To the music video, speaking of that, that was a huge event for us. We were in the middle of Brooklyn, Fort Greene Park, five, I'm going to say about 5 to 10,000 people were part of this video. If you've seen the video, it has an entire march of people with numerous colorful flags. It had Zulu dancers. We had 3 or 4 different scenes from the neighborhood to a stoop to a inner side of a school, all of which had numerous extras, like hundreds of extras, and all of it was shot within 7 hours, which showed the absolute brilliance of Spike Lee. He had all of these locations already ready, a totally different camera crew ready at each location, all of the extras. The organization was literally top notch. And um, working with him, he was in the studio when we shot, I mean, when we recorded that record as well. He's one of the guys, I'm talking about Spike Lee, that said Revolution in the
Mm.
studio with us. So that's how hands on Spike Lee is. From a producer, because I produced all of that stuff, from a producer standpoint, it was tough because I'm coming off the tails of Public Enemy's, probably one of their biggest records, "Fight the Power," from another Spike Lee film, "Do the Right Thing," which it was the anthem throughout that entire film, and it did so much for the culture for that film that I wanted to at least make something that was a shadow or at least a fraction as dope as "Fight the Power" was, and so it was a very heady time for me as a producer slash artist where we happened to be in the trajectory of our own career. So it was very interesting, man, to be part of that time period. But I feel like we had a win on that. And I'm very proud of, what we did. And yeah, so it was just a trippy time.
Yeah, I'm like getting goosebumps and honestly tearing up hearing you talk about it because yeah, it felt like that was a continuation of the Fight the Power. Even the video itself with all of the people out and
Yeah.
the clips of you had the Zulu dancers in the Fight the Power, they had the FOI out there and
Yep.
just all of the optics of it all and what it meant. And for that time, it's interesting too that like I was in Wisconsin when I saw the movie when it came out and at the movie theater and that feeling, and it felt like it built up to, like I said, just a few years later at the Million Man March in 95. And that was such a moment of like, I was young and I converted to Islam at that point. That was such a moment that I think we all have, those of us that are conscious minded
Yeah.
and really care about what's right and what's true and
Yeah.
spiritual realities and virtues and things that are like driven by that. That was my particular moment where I really where I really believed, like I really believed
Yeah.
like this is it. This is it. These
Yeah.
people are not going to
Yeah.
keep having their way anymore, and that people are together now, and there's a vibe, and the culture is winning, and the what's right
Yep.
is like you're seeing these like this mass demonstrations of it, and
Yep.
man, it still breaks my heart to think about how imminent and how close it all really felt,
Yep.
and then just the things that happened afterwards and the way that it shows up in the music, man. That's the part
Yeah.
that breaks my heart, and that's where I say where you know I don't want to just stop the conversation at when the industry decided they were done, because you were not done giving,
Yeah.
you were not done producing,
Fact.
you were not done growing,
Fact.
you were not done flourishing.
Fact.
We ask you all the time to please share the podcast, like it, subscribe to it, put on your notifications, all of that stuff. It's really important to us that we work directly with people, that we don't serve corporate interests. That's not what we're here for. Our goal wasn't to be wealthy, or our version of wealthy, what Brother Speech talks about in this conversation. Our version of wealthy is being free. And free means that we get to contribute to things and to say things and to be part of things and encourage things and shine light on things that we think are positive and good. And that really requires being directly connected to the people that support. You're the ones that make that possible because you're so dope and you're so beautiful and you're so interested and you have so much care for these things that we talk about that you support it. You support the sponsors. You watch and share and all that stuff that drives traffic. But the best way to really support what we do is to go to brotherali.com and sign that mailing list so that we don't have to rely on social media for you to know about what's going on. And then you can also know about all the things that we do. So when we drop music, you'll know about it. And if you want to be part of the limited runs of vinyl and things like that that we do these limited vinyl just for the people that were present in that moment when it came out, not to make it exclusive on purpose to keep people away or to have some sort of like false supply demand thing happening, a scarcity thing. But it's really just like, how many people do we think are really present in the moment that we're offering this to the world? And we want those people to have something special that's just for us, just for them. So you'll be the first to know about those. You'll be the first to know when we go on tour, the podcast, the information about the podcast, learning series that we provide, all these things that we do at Travelers Media, you'll know about them first. The second piece that I really want you to know about and consider is the Caravan, which is our subscription service for the people that really want to be a part of supporting and engaging the work that we do. There are different tiers, there's all different ways to engage and levels and things like that. But I really encourage you, if you're listening to this right now, open a browser, go to brotherali.com, sign that mailing list, check out all the stuff we got going on, but check out that Caravan. And we appreciate your support beyond words. The products that we talk about on the Travelers Podcast, they're all ones that really speak to me and that have really enriched my life. And they're also being brought to you and brought to the world by people that I know and people who I share their ethos and their approach and their worldview. Oud is a product, OUD. Um, it basically is a tree that grows in Southeast Asia. The tree gets infected with a fungus and it produces naturally an antibody that fights the fungus. That antibody has tremendous healing properties, but if you're able to distill it, to smell it, the smell that it emits is part of what releases the incredible healing properties of the aloes wood of the oud. So Udimentary, OUDIMENTARY.com. These are people that fell in love with oud the way that I did, but took it to another level. Started traveling to Southeast Asia to meet with the people that grow and care for and harvest these trees. That we can't see trees as anything other than part of creation. They have rights, they have personalities, they're living realities that are part of creation. And so it's important to interact and engage them in that way. So to harvest them is a spiritual sacred practice. And there are people that have been doing this for generations. And so my friends at Udimentary, those are the people that they partner with. And they do it in a way that's sustainable. And they sell oud that's real. There are a lot of places where you can get fake oud and sometimes it's overpriced and all this stuff. But what we learn from coffee, what we learn from all the things that we want to get ethically sourced and holistic and natural and real and organic, like we want the real thing, you got to pay a little more for that. But once you've experienced it, you understand why. And you also know that the people that are involved in growing, harvesting, and providing it to the world, that they're being treated like human beings. They're being treated as the excavators and treasures that they are, that these are the people that help to bring these beautiful things into our lives, and so they should be treated like artists. They should be treated like the great public servants that they are. So udimentary.com is very rare in that sense. And this wood, it basically can be distilled into oil And a lot of people have smelled essential oils and Muslim oils and stuff like that. I'm telling you, this is like nothing you've ever smelled before, and until you smell it, really words can't do it justice. Also, the wood can be burned on a piece of charcoal, and the scent and the aroma that it emits is incredibly powerful. And these aromas, these smells, they help to create a sense in a human being. They affect our state as an individual, but then they also can affect our collective state and give us a collective experience. And also, scent is really deeply related to making memories. And so when I smell oud, it puts me in a certain state, but it also reminds me of the gatherings that I've been in, of people singing together and crying together and laughing together and studying together and exploring together and celebrating together and healing together. All of those experiences, it's like I'm in those rooms again as soon as I smell it. And the smell is so poignant and strong that it stays in the clothes and your hair and the room. It's a tremendously beautiful thing. So head to udimentary.com. When you go to the checkout, put in travelers and you get a discount. Um, and we're just so grateful to be partnering with Udimentary. I also want to say something very quickly about, first, like obviously Chuck is one of the most beautiful human beings that any of us could ever know, as a mentor, as an organizer, and he's opened the door for so many people. But you were one of the early ones to go to Atlanta in terms of hip hop, and you also had a lot. You also held the door for others in Atlanta, and I don't know if you always get credit for that. So could you please share with us, like, who were some of the people that you helped to encourage and bring along and shine the spotlight on?
Well, obviously, a lot of people would have to speak on that from their perspective. But what I remember is that coming to Atlanta, I was one of the first to really come to Atlanta as a place of refuge and as a place for building for Black movement within the music space and so on and so forth. When I got to Atlanta, Atlanta had more of an Atlanta, sort of like a Miami based type of style of hip hop. The subject matter was not anything like what we were talking about, and it was just on another tip. And it was what that was. But I brought a lot of people from the Midwest, for instance, to come to Atlanta for refuge, trying to escape sort of the oppressive themes and thoughts that was going on in the Midwest at the time. And a lot of building. So for me, I started a company called Vagabond, which I still have. And Vagabond, we used to literally throw concerts to bring that consciousness to Atlanta. So we were bringing African dance companies, drumming companies, um, African fashion, and Black owned businesses, along with the Fugees, Queen Latifah, Outkast, Goody Mob, Erica Badu, Far but along with Ben Harper and like a lot of these different energies, bringing them to Atlanta to perform all on the same bill. So in other words, a Ben Harper mixed with a Far mixed with or Ohio Players mixed with KRS One and a company called Cozy Dance Company out of Milwaukee. So in Gumbo, which is one of my crews that I produce. So like these are these are strategic, purposeful, intentional concerts that bring a certain energy to the public where they can start to say, wow, look at this diverse representation of blackness, of beauty, of revolution, fundamental change, all in one. So there's a dude named Jason Orr who's huge down here in Atlanta, who started an organization called Funk Jazz Cafe, where they would do the same things that I was bringing to the forefront, which was fashion, music, culture, bringing those things to the forefront to help uplift the people and show us who we were, to put a mirror in front of us to show us who we are, who we can be, and what we can accomplish as not just the people in Atlanta, but as a diaspora throughout the different places in the world, whether it be Africa, whether it be South America, or whether it be the Caribbean, so on and so forth. So um, those are the things that I know I brought to the table. But my hope is that people that have been moved by whatever I brought to the table will speak out more often because I do agree. I think that that's a part of the hip hop narrative, and especially the Atlanta one, that's not spoke about enough. And it's not because it gives me light, but it's because it's important to understand the intentional behaviors that were happening at the time to bring a certain narrative to the forefront so that people can celebrate ourselves and celebrate our movement and our forward movement. So, yeah.
You know, we talk a little bit about financial stuff, and I don't ask this to count your money or be in your pockets or watch your pockets or anything like that. But I am curious to know, how are you doing financially? Like, are you financially strong? Like, are you do you still see great residual from all the great work that you've done? Is the touring still as strong as I would hope that it is?
That's a great question. You know, how good or bad someone's doing financially is relative, right? It's relative to what they think good or bad is. For me personally, as a man that's 54 years old, I'm still on the road grinding to, as they say now, stack bills up because I personally want to go into the beautiful age of retirement. Like I look forward to that. I'm looking forward to retiring. I'm looking forward to um, being able to do other things that I really feel passionately about, but have the financial means to do it, even if my health declines, which even if it's beyond anything I'm doing as far as eating or working out and things that I can control. But just as you age, it can happen to anybody that despite my health declining, despite whatever happens with my children, I want my children, myself, my wife to be good. And so to me, that's financially strong. And I'm still trying to build that. To answer the question as far as how things are going from residuals and things from the past, it's pretty good for me because I was the writer,
Mhm.
producer of pretty much 90% of anything Arrested Development ever had that was hits, right? But I do worry for my other members who weren't the writers or producers of a lot of that. So I wish that I was in a position to be able to provide more for my entire crew. The Arrested Development crew is very big because we've had a lot of generations of crew. Unlike a De La who stayed the same three members for since day one to now, we haven't had that blessing. So we've had a lot of members that have helped the trajectory and the legacy of Arrested Development continue. I would love to be in a financial place where I can provide for all of those people to where we're all good and safe as much as I am. And that's my goals in stacking money now. So we still tour. We just got off a 35 city. I think I told you this when we were striving to book this interview. I just got off of a 35 city tour with Arrested Development overseas. We just did a nice run here in Atlanta. We did 3 nights at the City Winery in Atlanta. We just did Juneteenth in Pittsburgh. We're about to do New York. Anyway, long story short, we're still touring. And my goal right now is to stack those checks. Residuals from, royalties and stuff like that is ebbs and flows. But the further you get away from it, the less and less it is. Not to mention the labels play a lot of tricks. So I don't know how your trajectory has been with your label, um, but with us, they play a lot of tricks where they've taken money from us and dared us to sue them. We've had to audit the label numerous times to force them to pay up monies, and that costs money. So there's a lot of you know, sort of battles going on behind the scenes to try to make sure we get our just due. And that's been a narrative for us since day one. Talking to a lot of artists, that's been their narrative too. Of course, De La's had that issue with the rights of their music, getting paid properly with their music. So it's not a unique thing to just us, but it is still a thing. So to answer your question, I know I went around the world to answer that, but it's a pretty complex thing, and it's a perspective that each person would probably have their own perspectives as what is really looking financially strong. How does that look for them? For me, I think I'm doing all right, right? I'm doing well. I'm all good. One of the things, and I'm just sharing this with your viewers and listeners, I bought a lot of things during the heyday of Arrested Development. I bought land. I bought acres of land. I bought a house. I bought offices, like other land and other buildings, to where I still own those things. So having that land ownership, and I talk about that on the second album, Zingalama I have a song called Aching for Acres. I knew that, and this is just part of consciousness. I knew that ahead of time. Like I knew if I ever got wind to any money, I was going to buy acres of land. I wasn't going to buy, a nice Jeep or a car. I knew I was going to get land first and foremost. I knew I was going to buy things so that even if the tide went down for me financially and for the crew, that I was going to have some things that was going to maintain and maintain value regardless. So coming from that consciousness and coming from that rural lifestyle that I came from, I knew what would sustain me even in times of hard, peril financially from an industry standpoint. And I want to encourage people to think similarly. You know what I'm saying? Like there's ups and downs in this industry for most of us. And when those downs come, when those valleys come, what do you have to sustain you through that time period? You know, have you bought anything that's worth money despite your financial fluidity? You know what I mean? Um, Things of that nature. I try to teach that and share that with brothers and sisters so they can be empowered. You know what I mean?
You've taught so much. Yeah, I mean, I think about Acre for Acres and the joint about landlords and, really introducing this idea that like you do not have to rent from a person who hates you. You don't have to live in a place that's just a money-making venture. Your home, your family home doesn't have to be a money-making venture for somebody who would just be just fine if you died. So many things that
That's
we've
fact.
learned, man. The Mr. Window joint, obviously, and fishing for religion was obviously that was a big one for me as well.
Yep.
During the time that I was looking and saying like, obviously I want to have a
Yeah.
relationship with the creator. That's got to be the beginning. That's got to be the root
Yep.
and the foundation from which everything grows. But that foundation has to be, in a has to have a language and an interface to it that allows me to be healthy and to benefit myself and benefit the world and address the real things that are going on.
Exactly.
And you talk so much about permission. It's like I have the right to not necessarily be in the church that my parents are in, and it's not any, disrespect towards them, but this relationship between me and the
Yep.
creator has to be a really real. So many things, man, that you've taught and given. Again, also it's I know that people a lot of times maybe focus on the first few records, but if you were to, in your own words, give us an idea for what's the overarching message and legacy that you're gifting to the world? How would you describe it?
Two things: self determination and life music. So we're all gonna die. But while we are not dead, while we are alive, making music that empowers our life journey, not our death journey. So much of hip hop, unfortunately, speaks about others' demise. It gives energy to the demise of others. It gives energy towards um, that instead of energy towards our life. We are presently alive and we have so much potential within that life force. What are we going to do with it? So, self determination and celebrations of life.
Yeah, it's so weird that I've never hugged you. I might, I will very likely,
Yeah,
I very likely will cry onto you when I finally do. You know what I mean? Because man, I just love you, man, and I'm so very grateful for you and to
I
you,
love you.
and hopefully we can do it again. I know that you also have had projects around masculinity and mental health and healing, and there's so much that we could talk about. But I came up independently, and at a time when it was difficult enough to just be heard and to break through and things like that. And the first time they let me on TV, me and Mint Condition did my song called Uncle Sam Goddamn, and Stokely from Mint Condition, who is the drummer and the singer, they were my band on Conan O'Brien,
Yeah,
and he had a conversation with me where his father is Mahmoud Al-Kati, the leading black historian in the Twin Cities in Minneapolis. And he said, it's an interesting choice for
wow.
which song we're doing. You know, um, there's a very good chance that people tune into this show because they're trying to go to sleep. They want to laugh. They're trying to shake off, what's going on from there. So now they see this big albino Muslim guy with this black band behind him talking about Uncle Sam Goddamn.
Yeah,
He's like, if you blow all the way up and get big, they might invite you back.
Right.
But unless that happens, this
Yeah.
probably will be your last time performing. So I was like, so what do I do? And he's like, oh, you do the song. Of course you do the song. Like, yeah, I'm just
Right,
telling you what's
exactly,
going
yeah.
on. But I remember, I can't remember if I said it out loud to him or not, but I was like, man, I saw Arrested Development come on these shows. And I saw them come out and it was
Yeah.
full, the family was on the whole representation, the whole presentation was there, and so
Yep.
you've been a source of just strength and encouragement for the things in my life and career that feel good and positive to me. So, and I know that I'm just one of many, many people that feel that way, but you are appreciated and loved, and you're affecting people in ways that, hopefully you'll be able to feel. I just really hope that you feel that way, that regardless of whatever else happens, the goal of encouraging love and life and beauty in other people, that's a real thing, man. That's a very, very real thing. I love you, man. I
Yeah,
appreciate you.
I do believe it. I love you too. I do feel it. I do appreciate it. And others have made me feel that exact same way. So I know it's real. I know it's real. And I know that what we emit and what we put out there does make a difference. I'm living proof.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So I don't want to hold you. I mean, I do, but I won't. Thank you so much.
My brother, stay strong.
Back at you, brother.
Very appreciated, brother Ali. Much love.
Talk soon, inshallah. Special thanks to Speech for being so generous just with himself over the years. Listening to him, I get emotional a lot. I'm a public crier. Everybody that listens to this or knows me knows that. But I just think about listening to Speech's journey and the moment where, they came out of Milwaukee and Tennessee and then coming out of Atlanta, and like they break through and they have this moment where, or a couple years really, where they've got all these hits and then their music is so closely connected to Malcolm X and the movie and the legacy of Malcolm X and his rebirth in our generation, in our time. And then it becomes very clear that the music industry is going to push them out. You know, eh, Thinking about what that must have been like for him personally really reflects with on me, because of the time that that music was coming out. I really, and I mentioned it, you heard me say it, but I believed it. I believed that this was going to be it. And there are generations before me that believe the same thing, and there's a generation going on now that probably believes the same thing. And may we be successful in that. But then the heartbreaking reality that, like, this might not manifest itself right now the way that I thought it was going to. We're going to have to continue to be consistent. We're going to have to figure out ways to keep showing up and to keep offering and to keep digging and to keep mining the world of meaning and bringing it into the world that can be experienced by others. And that's the real work that cultural workers do and spiritual leaders do and artists do and real truth scholars and thought leaders do, you know. And there's something about Speech, man. I'm sure you probably picked up on it by listening, but like, he's so content and he's so happy and he's still so determined and he's still so bright. And what he offers is, I don't hear bitterness. I don't pick up any bitterness in this beautiful man. I don't hear any anger in this man. And he's got a right to anger. And he probably has moments of anger. And there are times when anger actually is necessary. We're not alive if we don't. It's one of the range of human experiences. But after having so much taken away from him, that he continues to tap back in to the real source of it all, because the people that control the purse strings, they're not our actual source of what we're really offering. And they're not our actual source of success. The real success comes from the building and the growth that we talked about throughout this podcast. So I'm just very, very grateful. This is one of the episodes I was really looking forward to. I always say shout out to my man Darian Washington, but special thanks to my man D for letting us come into his home and his podcast space. Please check out Food for Worms, which is Darian's podcast. There's an episode that Slug came on, and I hope that I get to come on soon. Food for Worms is my brother Darian's podcast that records out of this exact same space in Bushwick, Brooklyn, where I'm sitting at this very moment. Much love and special thanks to Amna Mirza and Mansour Panawala and Ant, and to Last Word, and to Mark from Medina. Travelers Podcast is produced by Brendan BK1 Kelly, and it is a production of Travelers Media. Much love. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.